Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Wine with Jimmy channel with your host, Jimmy Smith. Apologies about the first presentation. So if you're a bit squeamish, maybe this presentation won't be fully for you because there are some rather close-up pictures of the lousy louse Phylloxera. So yes, maybe it might not be the presentation for you, but welcome to the educational channel that really helps everybody in the world in terms of consumers of wine, students of wine, learn a little bit more about wine and enjoy it even more, because it's a wonderfully complex topic that covers multi-disciplines. And here today we are going to be talking more about well, biology, I suppose, and a bit of geography and geology here with the Phylloxera louse. So this is a part of our series here on Wine with Jimmy, which is called Explaining Wine Terminology. There is a certain topic and we talk about what it is and how it affects the world of wine. If you do have any comments or questions or concerns, you can get in touch and you can do so actually by commenting on this video below, because this is available on the world of YouTube. Please make sure you also click subscribe to get our weekly updates and also the like button. So I'm going to go through a lot of information here about Phylloxera, just a little quick bit about the history of Phylloxera before we get into what it is and what it does, because it's rather important. So I will actually keep this slide up a little bit. So maybe you want to close your eyes if you find that a little bit off-putting, that picture, but just a little bit on the history. Now we're going to go back to the 19th century, and this is really around the 1830s. Now Phylloxera is really a resident of America, and Europe had never seen Phylloxera until the creation of safer transatlantic travel. So basically the transoceanic transport ships, which were now much quicker to get across the Atlantic, meant that certain goods could get back to Europe. And that included things like agricultural and horticultural goods. And that meant that Phylloxera might have a little bit of a stepping stone into Europe. Before that, it wouldn't be able to get to Europe. Now, just after this, around 1845, something called late blight hits Europe, which is basically an attack of mildew that comes from the Americas. In the 1860s, they started to import a lot of American vines to combat things like oidium, which is your powdery mildew. And on those American vines, in the rootstocks, came this louse, came this aphid, Phylloxera, who hitched a ride across the safer crossing ships of the transatlantic and started, of course, to feast its eyes, or its tentacles, I'm not sure exactly which, but on the roots of Europe. And then from 1862 to 1865, vines in southern France mysteriously started to die because, of course, the grape growers, the vignerons, would not understand that Phylloxera had even come across this microscopic louse that hitched a ride, unbeknowingly to us, that it came into Europe. So vines started to die. Now it became such a serious problem because this was a pandemic. It started to really spread through Europe. And in the 1870s, rewards were set by the French government to come up with ways to combat the problems of the vineyards. Uprooting happened, burning of vineyards happened. And by 1875, carbon bisulfide was being industrially used as an explosive chemical to kill Phylloxera that was now sweeping through the vineyards. Of course, really only temporarily working, but really not for the long term. Eventually, grafting would happen. I'll talk about that later. That happened first in the Midi, and that really started the new steps, really, in terms of combating Phylloxera in Europe and eventually across the world. So just a little bit of history. Now, I have actually a video on my e-learning portal which goes into that history in much greater detail. So if you wanted to really learn the step-by-step process of the history of this bug, then please do come and have a look at www.winewithjimmy.com. Okay, so let's get into just a little bit here about exactly what is Phylloxera. So this is an aphid-like insect that feeds on and lays eggs on the roots of grapevines. And there's another picture of it in all of its glory, I suppose. These are almost microscopic. They are pale yellow sap-sucking insects. They love to get their little pincers into the roots to then get the nutrients and the sap out of the root. So they feed on those roots and the leaves of grapevines as well. And that depends on the genetic strain of Phylloxera. So yes, their dinner, their subsistence is really the root vine, and that's what you're seeing just here in this picture. So it therefore, because of the constant attack by the Phylloxera louse on the root vine, so the root of the vine, it weakens it. So it weakens it and causes swellings, it causes cracks, and then that, once it moves on, that leaves a wound. And that wound is what then becomes infected with bacteria and fungus, and it leads to rot of the root. So grape Phylloxera really only feeds on the Vitis species. So we don't find it on other plants around the world, and infests the entire root system. And also the leaves of Vitis species, and is gall forming, as you'll see here. So that's what we see on the leaves themselves, affected by Phylloxera. So yes, this is quite classic. Now, typically, the female of the species will sort of bury itself in the leaves, as you can see, and then it will gestate, and the eggs tend to fall into the soil. And then they are the ones that start to, I suppose, hatch and then eating the root vines. So that's what we find of that. Now, initially, they were not thought, because they thought to be in the ground only. So in the 19th century, they thought that this wouldn't spread because it would need to be physically spread. It would need to be taken by humans or animals and moved along. So the spread of it would be easy to manage. But then there were different types of Phylloxera found. So we have crawling, which is very limited amounts of spread, but then the flying Phylloxera, which of course you'll see in the pictures here, which can cause great spreading, and that's actually what really created the epidemic in the 19th century. But also commonly transported by humans. For example, on the roots of young vines, or in soil, or on equipment such as leaf trimmers and harvesters, or by irrigation water, could be all means of Phylloxera being spread by humans. And of course, going back to the original spreading in the 1860s, when it traversed from America to Europe, it was spread unbeknowingly by humans, because of course bringing it on that root stock of the vines that were being brought into Europe, seeing as a way, of course, of all their vines were dying. They wanted to introduce other vines from the world, which of course really created even further problems. So that's the spread of Phylloxera. So what does it do to the vine? What are the symptoms that we see on the vine? So first of all, the vines die of drought in patches that increase by size year by year. So you've got to think logically about this. It's that the roots are affected and they start to rot, so no longer can take up water or nutrients. So it actually looks above the ground that there is drought-like conditions, because it is suffering from not being able to absorb water or nutrients. So the vine roots are covered with the insects, surrounded by yellow eggs. Swelling occurs on older roots and on the leaves. We saw a picture, and there's a diagram here. You've got the pale green leaf galls as well, and they're on the undersurface of the leaves. You've also got slow, stunted shoot growth, and leaf yellowing appears in about 3 years, and the plant will actually eventually die. It will perish at about 5 years old after infestation in the local area. So just a little bit on management of Phylloxera. I've got a few slides of this. So the use of American vine species proved to be the way forward, especially types like Vitis berlanderi, which is on the far right-hand side there, Vitis ruparia, which is on the far left-hand side, and Vitis rupestris, which they are the ones that offer the best protection. These actual species, why are they good at protecting against Phylloxera? Well, it's one of evolution, because these are American species which have evolved along with Phylloxera to tolerate it. So therefore, they must have evolved something in order to protect themselves over many, many hundreds of years, of course. The species that we just mentioned up here on the slide, they form hard, corky layers that surround the egg, sealing the wounds and preventing invasion by things like fungus or bacteria. However, planting these American vines led to different and undesirable aromas in the resulting wine. So remember, when it first started to spread Phylloxera through Europe, they thought to bring American vines across to plant them in because they were surviving. But of course, the tastes, the aroma, the flavor was not too desired by European palates. So the solution was to graft European varieties onto rootstocks from American vines. So here you'll see the scion on the top. So this would be something like Chardonnay going onto an American rootstock. So this was the way forward. However, it was soon discovered that grafting onto the rootstocks of single American varieties caused problems, typically in the very sort of limestone, chalky, calcareous soils of Europe, as the American rootstocks had very little tolerance to the alkaline nature of these soils. So the vines suffered from chlorosis, turning the leaves yellow, halting photosynthesis and reducing yields and quality. So the next solution then, and this is our final slide, the solution was to think a little bit more creatively. So we know that we can't just grow American vines because the desired taste is not what European palates, and in fact the world palates, generally want. Then when we just graft onto American rootstocks, we found that there were initial problems with the geology found in Europe. So the next thing is to think a little bit more creatively around the solution of rootstock hybrids. So this is creating rootstock hybrids between various American species in order to balance the level of protection to Phylloxera and the resistance to lime in the soil, so that alkaline nature. The use of rootstocks derived from American species enabled the development of many rootstocks, often with very complex parentage, and that meant that it could deal with a number of problems like Phylloxera, but maybe further afield, like nematodes, the microscopic worms, extreme different pH levels of soils, water stress, salinity of the soils, and also vigor control of the vine. So basically, you've now got a bigger broad spectrum of benefits when you're working with the hybridization of the rootstocks. So today, a grape grower will get very good professional advice on the choice of rootstock and, of course, therefore, the grape variety, which is grafted onto it, in order to match the appropriate rootstock to the vineyard soil, and to the pests to be combated, the vigor levels, and other key issues within the vineyards. So Planting on rootstocks, the last thing to mention though is that it is significantly more expensive than on the vine's own roots because of all of the steps that have to happen previous in terms of the hybridization of the roots and grafting, etc. But it does become really a standardized part of vineyard costs today. Now, that said, there are certain parts in the world where you don't need to combat against phylloxera because it won't exist in the geology. So, for example, sandy soils, phylloxera just doesn't exist in. It's too good at drainage of water, so therefore it's not a good environment for phylloxera. Volcanic soils are another one as well, and very protected areas like islands, for example, a lot of the Greek islands. So there are those places that do not have to graft. And that, of course, means that there are a number of things to talk about, but certainly the fact that there is a cost reduction in that area. Okay, so that really is just explaining a little bit around about what phylloxera is, what it does, how it's managed, but also a little bit, to begin with, the history of phylloxera. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. There is a wonderful book that is called Phylloxera. I haven't got it to hand at the moment, but please do go and look at that book if you need more information. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. But if you want more educational information on phylloxera and around grafting, remember we have a whole portal which is called Wine with Jimmy. If you go and visit www.winewithjimmy, I'll put the link up just here. Go and click on that. There's a portal here to help you with your studies, certainly with things like WSET or the CSW. So lots of different units on there with things like flashcards, short written answer questions, things like map questions, and multiple choice, but also a huge volume of videos like this, lots of exclusive content. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Any comments or questions, please get in touch by social media that you see at the bottom of every slide, or of course, comment on this video below. Make sure you click subscribe and also like. And if you find yourself in London, then I have wine schools and a wine bar. So come and see me for a class, a glass or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now. Bye.